I was watching that men all of a sudden are presenting as women. They have been going to the men's world. I'm going to beat him at his game. I'm going to be a boss babe. And again, I'm not making fun. I want women to thrive, but I want them to thrive as women. I remember just one night I was in the shower and I was just feeling so overwhelmed. And I heard the Holy Spirit say, "You don't think John is a good head of the household, do you?" And
Ruslan.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have our very first New York Times best-selling author in the house. She speaks on biblical womanhood, wholeness, and her new book is about reclaiming femininity. I am so ecstatic today to be with the one and only Lisa Bevere. Thank you so much for being here.
I can't believe I'm your first.
You are my first New York Times bestseller.
Oh my gosh,
Yes.
that's crazy.
Yeah. I was listening to your husband's podcast a while ago, and he mentioned, he's like, I'm not a New York Times bestseller, yes, but my wife is. I was like, that is the coolest thing ever.
Well, that's because I didn't title my books Of God.
Aha.
I said Without Rival. And they're like, yes, we all want an identity without rival. So yes.
I love the Awe of God cover. Like I saw it in airports.
Isn't
and I
it
was
beautiful?
Like, I love this cover and just the way it pops. So I saw it everywhere. So I assumed, if he's not a New York Times bestseller with this one, I'm sure he will be soon.
So he's sold way more books than me, but he's still not, because it's actually has nothing to do with the numbers as much as it has to do with they pick and choose.
Really?
Yes.
Oh, interesting.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. No. So I mean, his book is still in the top 150 on Amazon, and it's been out for almost a year and a half.
That's amazing.
Yes.
Okay. So you guys are kind of like this sounds weird to say, but kind of like a power couple. Both putting out amazing books.
Yep.
Helping people. You've been married, you said 45 years?
42.
42 years.
42 years.
Congratulations.
Yeah, and John is the one who led me to the Lord on our very first date. I don't know if you
Really?
know that. It's totally illegal, but it worked for us.
Whoa, what do you mean illegal?
Well, I mean, people are like, you're not supposed to date people that are non-Christians.
Oh,
And
okay.
So he invited me to a Bible study picnic, and all I heard was free food. So I go to this picnic, and they're in a circle, and they're singing songs. And I'm from a Catholic background. And so we're all about being quiet. And the people have their hands in the air. I'm like, do they have a question? What is going on? And so I looked down at this song sheet, and it was this song called Robes of Righteousness. And it said, when God looked at me, he would no longer see me, but he would see Jesus. And
Wow.
I elbowed John. I said, is this true? And he said, is what true? I said, is it true that God could ever look at me and not see me? Because I had such an awareness of my sin and shame. And we went walking that night, and John was witnessing to me. I finally just said, I want to do this. Like, what do we need to do? Light candles? Like, what needs to happen right now?
Yeah.
And he said, well, we can just pray. And so we prayed, and he said, now you're saved. I said, what does that even mean? And he said, it means you're whole again, spirit, soul, and body. And he had no idea. He was talking to somebody who's lactose intolerant. I said, so I can have cheese now that I'm a Christian? And he was like, what? I said, you just said I could have cheese. He said, I did not say that. I said, well, I want to have cheese. And so he was like, oh God. He grabbed my hands. He was like, God, if you can save this heathen, you can heal her. And so I got totally healed right then.
Of the lactose intolerance?
Absolutely.
Get out.
I felt this warmth and love come into my stomach and untie all the knots. I'd been there since I was 15.
Wow.
Yeah, it was crazy.
Okay, so how long did you guys date and then until you got married?
So we met in July and of 81, and we got married in October of 1982.
Okay, so pretty quick.
Pretty quick.
Yeah. Me and my wife dated for 4 years, and it was 3 years too long.
I'm with you. I think you might as well grow together.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we
Now, how old were you guys?
right now?
Well, no, back then.
I was 21 when I met him, 22 when I got married, and he was 23.
Okay, so we were 21, 23 as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
We were babies. I look back, I'm like, we should not have been allowed to be married, but it worked for us.
So 4 boys and how many grandkids?
So I'm expecting my 9th grandchild. Wow. So we have 5 little boys and then 4 little girl, 4 little girls.
42 years of marriage.
Yes.
4 boys.
Yes.
9, about to be 9 grandkids.
Yes.
That's incredible.
Yes.
Okay, so I got a lot. Okay, so I got like personal questions,
Yes.
and then I have like stuff around the book.
Yes.
Let me just give you a bit of my context.
Yeah.
Okay, and you could push back. So we've been having this conversation. I got in trouble. I went on the Craze podcast.
Okay.
And the idea of women and patriarchy came up.
Yes.
And I described what I thought was biblical complementarianism.
Yes.
Right? Ephesians.
Yes.
The husband is the head, as Christ is the head of the church. The wife is to submit.
Yep.
and then the husband's to lay down his life
Right.
for the wife, right?
Right.
Which you talk about that in your book, how there's way more
Yes.
prescriptions for what the husband's supposed to
Way
be
more.
doing
Yes.
than it is for what the wife's supposed to be doing. So in that, we got into the idea of like I would say like the modern definition of patriarchy, which is like systems maintained to keep powerful women, right? And then we got into
I'm sorry.
the
sorry.
so I got a woman here to set everybody straight, okay? Or I get set straight. So then we got into some pretty alarming statistics, and I did a follow-up video about this. There were some secular studies done that found that 56% of working women, one study said 56%, one study said 64%, one study said 84%, Forbes women said, of women who work with kids 18 and under would have preferred to stay home for a season
Yes.
had they been given the opportunity to.
Yes.
And the women in Forbes actually said it was one of their career aspirations was
Yes.
to be a stay-at-home mom for a season, okay? And I got dragged by people who said this is misogynistic and this doesn't make women equal and everything. So I said, you know what, this is great.
They don't value being a mother.
Right.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
help me understand this. Like
Yeah.
there seems to be something as simple as, like, my wife went to college. She works on our business now. She does the books. She does our designs.
Yeah.
But there seems to be like the reality of biology that when you have a baby, that it just does something, even to highly driven career entrepreneurial authors, that something just changes. And that I think it's empowering to women to tell young men to say, hey, just so you know, most women are not Christian women. This wasn't a study on Christian women, conservative women, just women
all
with
women.
kids who work. They're going to desire this at some point in their life. Young men, let's make sure that we have our house in order, that we have our finances in order, that we have our lives in order, so we can you guys can give your future wives the opportunity to stay home, right?
So,
and that just did not land. The times are not the same. It's too expensive. It's inflation. You don't understand. So what do you make of all that before we get into the book?
Okay. Well, I used to work as a television producer.
Okay.
And John worked part-time. And I had my first baby. And I decided I did not want to work, that I wanted to be a mother. You know, there's something that happens in a woman. You brought that up. When you carry a child, their DNA stays in your bloodstream for a certain amount of time, but it always remains in your brain for the rest of your life. That doesn't happen to men. It only happens to women. You carry that child, whether you ever give birth to it or not. So even in an abortion, you're going to carry that child in your body. And so
I
I
just got
said,
goosebumps when you said that.
isn't
Wow.
that crazy?
Yeah.
So God weaves it. And that's why God says, even if a mother can forget the child, he doesn't say father, he says mother. He says, I've written you on the palm of my hand, meaning I'm going to always have you in front of me. So I decided, I did the whole, I'm going to go to work. I'm going to pump my breasts out during my lunch hour. I'm going to be Superwoman. I lived in Dallas. My ears were attached to my shoulders. I was so stressed out. And I remember, again, John's working part-time. I'm working full-time. I've got all the insurance benefits. I've got everything going.
What were you doing for work?
I was a television producer.
Okay,
Yeah,
so like a
yeah.
secular TV station.
It was a
type-
Christian one,
Christian
but,
TV.
but I
okay.
did the spots. I did the 30-second, 60-second, 90-second spots. And I remember just one night I was in the shower and I was just feeling so overwhelmed. And I heard the Holy Spirit say, you don't think John is a good head of the household, do you? And I said, no, I don't. And he said, you think you can do it better? And I said, I can do it better. And he said, it's a yoke to you, but it's a mantle to John. Throw it off.
Holy moly.
Throw it off. I said,
Wow.
if I throw it off, the garbage won't even go out. He can't get the baby. He said, John likes you doing everything. He said, but I did not create you to have to carry all this. And he said, it is weighing you down. And then Ruslan, I started to remember all these conversations I'd had with my husband where John would say, I don't know what I should do. Should we do this or do this? And, this is hard for you to see my husband now this way, but I'd be like, you need to do this. If you don't do that, we're going to have a crisis. And he'd be like, I think I'll do that. And then it'd be a crisis. And you know what I would do? I'd follow him around and say, you remember I told you not to do that. And I thought he'd be like, you are the most amazing person on the face of the earth. But he didn't. He pulled away from me. And so now we've got two people living in a house. I'm giving all of my affection to my child. I'm pushing my own husband away. And so he's watching me with the baby and it's like, she knows how to be nice. She's just not going to be nice with me. And I just broke that night. And I came out and I said, John, you know what? I will quit my job tomorrow, but I want to be one with you again. I want to have peace. And John was like, you don't need to quit your job. but you do need to quit thinking you're the source. You can stay home and think you're the source and you'll be worried, or you can work full time and think you're the source. Or you can have peace working full time. So I made a decision, and we took a huge financial pay cut. I made the decision we are going to live off of $27,000 a year.
What year was this?
This was back in 1987. It still wasn't a lot of money.
Yeah.
It was like right at the poverty level. But we paid off all of our debts. We had one car, and we had a house that was $83,000. And I said, I'm going to stay home. And we worked on a cash basis. And I am so thankful that I was home with my kids. And so I was able to do that. And I get this, if you're a single mom, I get you can't do that. But again, every single mom would have preferred, the majority of them, to have a man and a father in their children's life. So I 100% agree with that. And I think everything has a season. I mean, women only have a certain amount of time where you can bear children. And so and I've talked to these young girls, they're like, I froze my eggs and I haven't found a husband. And I'm 45 and I'm an attorney and I want to get married. And, it's kind of like you missed that season. And the right thing in the wrong season is the wrong thing. And so too many girls, they think, oh, I want to go out there and I want to make it. Can I tell you the things I'm the most proud of? First of all, when you get a New York Times bestseller, no one even comes to your house. They don't even send you an email. I mean, there's nothing.
There's no parade.
Nothing. Oh, there's no parade. This is how I found out. So, I have boys, which means they are always partially clothed. And so anyway, I'm sound asleep. My husband's sound asleep. At 11 o'clock at night, I hear bang, bang, bang on my door. Both jump up. I'm thinking someone's bleeding. I open the door. There's two men standing in boxer briefs. And I'm like, what is going on? Where's the third one? And they said, you're a New York Times bestselling author. We just found it online. I said, what? They pick me up, they jump up and down, they throw me on top of John, and they leave. And I called my publisher the next day. I'm like, is this true? And they said, yes. I mean, I could have even missed it. It was just like a week or two, and it was gone. Who I am the most proud of is my sons. I'm watching them do life and marriage better than us. Do John and I, we have a legacy. And, I have a friend that always defines a legacy is a life worth repeating. When John and I got married, we said we want to do it together. But together doesn't always mean same. So there was an opportunity. So John always valued that I stayed home. We always believed that he who goes to war and he who stays home and guards the supply, same reward. John never made me feel less than. And with my kids, he would come home and he would tell them, hey, this is what happened in the meeting. This is what I've learned. He would share with them what he was learning in the Bible. He would share the mistakes he made. My husband has been, I believe, the most transformative because he has always owned his mistakes. He came to my boys and he said, I used to travel all the time. And they said, yeah. And he said, I needed to do that for a while. But then it was easier to travel than it was to be at home. Oof. And he said, because you get clapped for when people buy your books. And he said, it was harder to do homework with you guys. And he said, will you forgive me? And I believe once you own something, it no longer owns you. Come on. And so John just totally, he's my boy's hero. Wow. Our boys live down the street from us. And my oldest son and my youngest son work with us. And then my one son contracts with us. And then my other son, he's my contrarian. He's doing authenticating sportswear. That's incredible. There has to be one.
Yeah. I love that. Okay, so our journey was similar in that, we got married around the same age, younger. I made every financial bad decision you can make.
Yeah.
Bought a car when I couldn't afford it, racked up credit card debt, student loans, co-signed on a condo with my mom that went into foreclosure during the peak of the housing bubble in the mid 2000s. Like everything you could do done with money. And so one of the things that we really locked in on was like, hey, we got to change our family tree when it comes to finances. Yeah. So we went all in on the Dave Ramsey stuff for a year and a half. In the process, I ended up getting sued. Got my accounts levied.
Should I be talking to you?
Yeah. and by the grace of God, within 18 months, we were completely debt free. Yeah. It was about technically on the hook for $100,000 in debt. And this is about 15 years ago that we did all this. And so that laid the foundation to now go, okay, so we don't have any debt, so our burn rate is nothing.
Yeah. That's how we are.
Now we have our emergency fund of 6 months. And then I was able to go work at a church for 2 years as like a transition thing. And then from there, I was able to transition to doing full-time what I'm doing now in music and stuff like that. But it was very similar in that decreased the overhead. so that my wife can stay home.
Yeah.
So we're not on the hook for as much. And that gave her the freedom to be a mom and to just be home with my son and just enjoy that season.
Yeah.
But it was a sacrifice. It was a lot of rice and beans and rice, not eating
My
out.
kids, my kids thought we were vegetarians. We told them tofu was Chinese cheese. I mean, like that was how we did protein.
Yeah.
But even speaking to that was an adjustment for me. Going from doing television producing to sitting home with a child. And then I remember I had my second child, and I was like, I'm not doing this well.
What's the age of your kids?
I have I don't even know their ages now, but I had 3 and 5 years, and then 3 years later I had another one.
3 and 5.
Yeah, so I had 3 and 5 years. That was the crazy time period. I was like, for the safety of my children, need to go back to work full time. And John was like, no, you told me that God told you to stay home. I said, pregnant women will say anything. Like I did not, I've just changed my mind.
Yeah.
But no, I am so happy. And we did that. We went way down. And I remember the day came where, I was staying home. I edited all of my husband's books. I worked on his books. I was very involved in his projects. Because everybody asked me, how did you start writing? And I said, I served in secret.
Oof.
And they're like, what? I said, I served in secret. My husband would say, I don't know what I'm doing with this. And I said, listen, I know what you want to say. I know your heart. And I also know you're going to be speaking to women. So let me reframe it. And the truth is, every wife loves to edit her husband. We're like, you should have said it like this.
Yeah.
So I said, I will take over this for you. So I worked, like from 10 o'clock at night to 2 a.m. in the morning on John's book, The Bait of Satan. I was super involved in his next 2 books. And the publisher came to us and said, hey, we think there's a book in Lisa. And if she writes it, we'll publish it. And I said, oh, wait a minute. Messing with my husband's stuff is very different than coming up with my own. And they said, well, what would you do? And I said, well, I'm kind of a rogue Christian. I'm like, I have double pierced ears. Like, I don't like pantyhose. I'm like, I don't know. And they said, well, what would you write on? I said, okay. I'd write on facing fears. I'd talk about how I grew up in a physically and emotionally abusive household and how I had to face off with that with my very first son. I had the things I didn't forgive almost repeated themselves. And they're like, okay. So I wrote a book called Out of Control and Loving It in 1994 and wrote about those things. And then it just opened up a world for me that it's been an incredible privilege to be able to write.
That's incredible. Okay, I want to talk about the latest book.
Yeah, which is getting me in trouble too. So
is it?
Oh,
okay,
of
great.
course,
We'll just be in trouble together. So you emphasize like the importance of women reclaiming their sacred space and identity, particularly kind of looking at Proverbs chapter 31.
Yep.
So in today's world, what do you see the balance for women between managing the home and managing outside ventures? Because I think people kind of
I think you could do both.
You can do both.
You can do both.
Yeah.
And you just can't be consumed by either. And I think that Proverbs 31 woman says she considers a field and buys it. It doesn't say she asks her husband for permission. So she has the ability to consider, she invests, she's an entrepreneur woman. So all of that is good. But what I haven't been happy about is women have entered the marketplace as men.
Oof.
So that's what I was sitting next to a guy from Exxon, and I asked him, he was research and development, and it was back when gas prices were really high. I said, why can you guys not get these down? And he said, well, he explained to me how many times they look and don't find it. And then I said, well, tell me about your team. And he said, well, this is what it looks like. And I said, how many women do you have on your team? He said, 1. I said, why? He said, they sabotage each other. And he said, I need women to come in and look at things differently. And they try to act like one of the guys. And he said, now it's interesting that I would love to have more, but I can't bring them in. Now, this is fascinating to me that women have actually forgotten they have a unique entrustment. So I wrote a book years ago called Lioness Rising. And after the book was already out, I was driving in the car and I was praying and I said, God, I wrote a book. It's already in 5 languages. I know that you gave me this as a dream, but I just need you to know it's in a book. I hope that was all right. That night, I get a call while I'm in the middle of my son's school project. My youngest son was like, I forgot I have a school project due tomorrow. So I brave a blizzard in Colorado, get everything. John calls home and says, hey, I've given this guy your number. You need to talk to him. I'm working on a school project with your kids. You don't even know what that is. So this guy calls me and he said, hey, your husband held up your book, Lioness Rising. I said, yeah. He said that lions are the best killers, but lionesses are the best hunters. And I said, yeah, that's all he knows. He's never read the book. And he said, well, I'm calling you to tell you why your book is important. And I said, okay. He said, do you know we're not winning the war in Afghanistan? I said, yeah, I did know that. And he said, do you want to know why? And I said, sure. Right now in the middle of my son's school project, I must know why the U.S. is not winning the war. He said, first of all, we can't win the war because we can't speak to the women. And if you can't speak to the women, you can't flip a culture. And if you can't flip the culture, you can't win the war. He said, let me tell you what I do here at Fort Bragg. He said, I'm in charge of special ops women. And he said, up until this point, we've only sent in men, but now we're going to send in women. And they're going to tell the Afghan women they have voice and value. They're going to take care of their minor medical needs. They're going to help deliver their babies. And they're going to tell them why their sons and daughters will grow up to a more prosperous lifestyle through democracy. And I said, that's great. And he said, do you want to know the name of this group? I said, sure. He said, it's called Team Lioness. They're about ready to be deployed. Can I have a copy of your book for all of them? So I outfitted all of them. Wow. But see, the U.S. military understands that women and men fight different. Women fight by flourishing. Men fight by killing. And I know that sounds ruthless, but we fight with life. So when I was writing this book, I was watching what was happening in the culture. I was watching that men all of a sudden are presenting as women. And I'm like, I'm not happy with that. But I'm not completely surprised because women have been presenting as men for decades now. They've been going to the men's world. I'm going to beat him at his game. I'm going to be a boss babe. And again, I'm not making fun. I want women to thrive, but I want them to thrive as women, not as men. And right now, what we see is this incredible competition in the genders where there should be a coordination. Like my husband sees things I miss, but I feel things he miss. And we need those two together. And we've just got women trying to tell men how to act. And I don't even really feel like the men are trying to tell the women how to act. No, I'm serious. As a mother of 4 sons, I've watched sitcoms and dramas. They have emasculated the men. They have mocked the men. And the women are always the smarter, the brighter, the manipulative ones, the insights. And I'm like, that's not true. I mean, they're both. We don't have a scarcity mindset where we add value to women by taking it from men. And so, I mean, even the Barbie movie, I was horrified by it. I made myself watch it because it was important. But I was horrified by the opening where they take the baby dolls and break them. And then they have this iconic prostitute, because that's what Barbie was modeled after, was a German prostitute.
Wow.
Iconic, which every woman can never be. She's never going to be tall enough, thin enough, blonde enough, white enough, whatever Barbie is.
From a physiology standpoint,
Yes,
you
exactly.
physically cannot be what a Barbie is.
Because it's not even possible to breathe if you were that. So it's distorted. And so I'm looking at what's going on, what we're putting in front of our daughters, what we're putting in front of our sons. And, you know, I live in Franklin, Tennessee, which is a little bit of a Christian bubble. And I went to a coffee shop wearing a T-shirt that said the future is male and female. And I had men coming up to me like, thank you for including us in the future. I'm like, you're welcome. You're welcome.
And what you would call a Christian bubble. I've been to Franklin
in a Christian
before.
bubble. Yes.
That's interesting.
And then I had women saying, I want that T-shirt. So I thought everybody's happy with this. So I take a selfie. And I just wrote, the future is male and female, because without male and female, there is no future. That's your parents. It's not even deep.
I mean, it's just biology.
Exactly.
It's how we reproduce as a species.
Thank you. Well, 922 comments later, people are like, you are co-signing with patriarchy.
Wow.
Jesus would never co-sign with the oppression of women. I'm like, what in the world? It's our turn now. The men have always had turns. I mean, women, Christian women flipping out. Coded like all lives matter, somebody said. Then somebody else called me a bigot. Then that was the first time I'd ever gotten that. Demon of hate.
Wow.
I mean,
was this your audience, or did this go beyond your audience? Your own audience. Wow.
My Instagram people, which my husband said are way meaner than his. But yes. And so I'm like, if there is this much of a reaction, there's something more behind this. So I just went home and I just typed into my laptop, what is the origin of the quote, the future is female? And a Washington Post article came up from a lesbian separatist group called Labrys. I thought, what is Labrys? Well, it's the 2-headed axe carried by Amazons and Greek and Roman goddesses. And they said that the future is female. You're going to love this. Was a call to war, an invocation, and a spell to cast.
Whoa, that's crazy.
25% of the proceeds, not profits, go to Planned Parenthood.
Whoa.
And Hillary Clinton brought it into her campaign in 2015.
Whoa.
Yes.
So it almost seems like a. I mean, I don't mean to be the
seems
spooky, like some sort of spell cast on society.
They said it was a spell to cast. Yes. Yes. It was part of a presentation called What a Well-Dressed Dyke Would Wear. And here we've got all these kids wearing it with people like, don't even want. So what was crazy is right after that, my oldest grandson showed up at my house. I'm pretty sure his mother said, no, you can't have anything to eat. So they just ride their bike down to my house and go straight into the pantry because I'm the grandmother. And I was like, Asher, what are your thoughts on the quote, the future is female? And he said that I'm unnecessary. And 24 to 35-year-old males have the highest suicide rate that they've ever had right now. They feel unnecessary. They feel purposeless. They have no vision. They're like, I don't even know what to do. They have isolation was not good for the men. Let's just be honest with that. They have isolation. They have aggression. They don't have any outlet for. Man needs woman. That's what God said. God said it's not good for man to be alone. And the woman was not created because she was like, oh, you're going to be subservient. No, she was necessary. She was not an afterthought. And what we've done in the church, and the church has mishandled this. When you bring up to me a complementarian mindset, you knew he washes his bride. He gives his life. Most people, when it's complementarian, it's all about the woman submitting. It's not about the husband laying down his life like Christ lays down his life. So it's very scary for women. And then John and I believe submission means under assignment. So you only submit to people you build with. So I submit to my husband. That's who I'm building with. And what are we building? A life, a marriage, a family. That's what we're building. And even in our case, a ministry together. Do you know that I do not accept any speaking engagements until John approves it? Guess what? He doesn't accept any until I approve it. It goes both ways because it's our time together. And so I'm not a doormat, but I'm kind of like, if you took an egalitarian and a complementarian and they got married and had a baby, that would be me.
Yeah, I mean, well, what you're describing just sounds like traditional complementarianism. Like it sounds like,
except for I do believe that women can preach.
Yeah, I think,
and that's kind of, I think, where they get like all scared if women stand behind a pulpit. All of a sudden it's magic. And
no, so I actually did a deep dive on this recently, where one, we see women deacons in the Bible, we see women deacons in church history, and so I would be, I guess you would call it soft complementarian, where I think women can do everything in the church. I would probably put that caveat as without being a lead pastor. Right. So that's probably where I would draw the line.
And I'm kind of more that I would probably agree with you, but I don't think it's a sin.
Yeah,
people make it a salvation issue. For me, it's not like, oh well.
Sure.
You know.
Well, I also think it's, I've never really thought like, is it a sin? Is it not a sin? I just more think from a scriptural standpoint. I think if there's underground churches in China
and women are leading
in North Korea, and there's a woman and that's the only person there to lead this
Iran,
group,
that's where the majority of them are.
And so it's like, I don't think God's looking at that and being like, oh my gosh, these, I don't think that's God's
They're
heart.
in rebellion.
Let's come back. I want to talk more about the model in Proverbs 31. So you tell me what you think about this. So there seems to be both in Proverbs 31, as you laid out. There seems to be a ability to go out by a field, right? But then there also seems to be a priority of the home, right?
Yes.
Is it fair to say that what we're reading in Proverbs 31 is probably a woman whose kids are a little bit older? Is probably a woman who has been married for a bit, right?
I would think for her to be able to do everything that she's doing, that would be the season of her life.
That would be the season, right? And so
absolutely.
I think sometimes what people do with Proverbs 31 is they take that and they apply that to younger women who don't have the years of marriage, the wisdom, right? The life experience.
I would have been making all of your financial mistakes if I had been going out and buying fields when I was breastfeeding. I'm pretty sure I would have had baby brain. No, 100%. 100. And again, it's going back to seasonal and everything. I mean, life is a time test.
Yes.
You only have your kids for 20 years. Now, of course, we're Italian, so we have them longer. But I mean, you're supposed to, you pretty much you're setting them up to go from one family to another family. And so, what are you going to do? Are you going to let somebody else train them all those times? I remember ministering somewhere, and I know someone was being precious, and they came to, it was a women's meeting, they came up to me afterwards, and they said, the hand of God is on you to preach. And God said, if you need to go and travel, even he'll send angels. And I'm like, well, if an angel shows up, I will take care of that. But I said, right now, I am the provision for my children. He gave them to me. And I breastfed all my boys till they asked me to stop. They were like, it's been 2.5 years. We're not doing this for you anymore. The other kids in the nursery are laughing at us.
Yeah.
I mean, I loved being a mother. I was fully immersed because what happens is there is strength in every season. And if you rush through that season,
Come on.
you miss the strength you need for the next season.
Yeah.
And, I'm so thankful. All of my daughter-in-laws, they have the ability to stay home. But we also told them, don't buy a house that requires both of you to have to work full time. If your wife wants to work, if she has a creative outlet, like one of my daughter-in-laws, my youngest son's wife is my producer, and we work together, and we have a great working. But if she looks at me and says, my son is sick, or I just don't want, that's the highest priority.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's good. Yeah, it's about two things you said: season, priority.
Yeah.
Right. What is the priority in the season that you're in? And I think I think the pressures, it seems like, for women is that they're told they can have everything at the same time.
You can't. No one can.
Yeah.
No one can. I mean, seriously. Like, I even remember thinking, if I do not get the strength of this season, because the season us, whether we realize it or not, that season, and it's like a blur when their kids are young, and you will miss so much. My oldest son, I remember when I had my second son, he came to my room one night. He said, I had a nightmare. I had a nightmare you put Austin into daycare. And I looked I looked at him and I said, do you know why you had that nightmare? And he said, no. I said, because I used to put you into daycare. And he just said, you did? I said, I did. And, we just talked it through. He didn't remember, but he did. And so I believe boys have to be outside in the dirt playing. I believe husbandry is actually like that. That's how you create a vine. So if we don't let men go out and do things physically, they do not bring to their marriage the physical things they need to bring, because the woman guards the heart and the man guards the woman. He guards the home. He creates, or he provides. Like John, I always tell him, you give me the house, I give you the home. You give,
good.
And again, I make money too. Yeah. But see, it's not my money and his money, it's ours.
That's good.
And it's always been ours.
There's so many gems in there. I mean, you talk about, obviously, the money aspect. You talked earlier about living below your means. You talked about...
we had one car until we had our fourth son.
Really?
Yes.
Yeah. Wow.
Because we wouldn't fit. We had a Honda Civic. And I said,
you had to get another car.
I said, go get another car. He got it while I was in the hospital.
Yeah.
I had just given birth.
That's so good. There's so much wisdom in that. But I think about like the practical side of this need for people to say, like, you have to have two incomes now. You have to have two. You don't understand inflation. You don't understand this, the cost of living. And I've dug away at some of the studies, and they found out that some families with dual incomes actually take home less when you factor in
eating out, wardrobe,
daycare. But daycare is a big one.
It's huge.
People spend $25,000 to $40,000 a year on daycare
at least.
Yeah, and so when you're looking at, I think the average dual income family, I want to say, takes home around $58,000. The average single income family takes home around $50,000. So, like, is that $8,000, $10,000 worth it? When you
with
factor
all the stress,
and you're sending your babies
to strangers,
and
they're sick all the time
for the majority of their waking hours,
100%.
And so again, this is not obviously you went through a season of it, so this is not. I'm not saying this is a way to like shame people, but I'm saying this, and you kind of.
But you can course correct, like John and I had to say, we're going to cut. We had to go from 54,000 to 27.
That's a big cut.
It was a huge cut, and then you know what we did? We went from 27 to 0, because John said, "I'm quitting my job. God told me to quit my job. I'm going to live by faith." I was like, well, if this doesn't work out in a week, you're going to be sacking groceries because I am staying home with my children.
Yeah.
And we believed God for every single penny that came into our house when we were making 27. And then we believed God for every single penny that came into our house. But it's like what you said, when you bring it down low, then all you're doing is building. And John has like this gift where the majority of the money that we have in our life right now, and I would say the wealth, John has like a real estate gift. He'll just be like, I see that piece of dirt, I need to buy it. He'll buy it and he'll flip it. And like I remember it just so like God says little can be much.
That's good.
Like God will show you things. And going back to me, so I'm staying home. I'm my husband's traveling. I'm staying home with my kids, and then I get a check one day that's an advance for a book. And when I held it in my hands, I heard God say, "This is your reward for all the years you stayed home and you served in secret. You could never have saved this much money, and it has all just now come to you as one big check."
Wow.
And I was like, oh my gosh. I mean, I started crying.
Yeah.
And the truth is, that was the season. And people think I left my kids. I was always the one that took my kids to church. John was gone. I'd go out on Friday, come home on Saturday. The boys slept in my room Saturday night. They woke up Sunday morning. I was in my bed, and we all went to church. I loved being a mom. And I am not, if there's anything I regret, I'll say I wish I would have played with my boys more. I wish I would have gotten down on the floor and played instead of just be cleaning everything. I wish I would have enjoyed them rather than survived them. And so many young moms, I'm like, just forget about trifolding the underwear. Forget about doing that. Enjoy your husband. Enjoy your children. Everybody will tell you it goes by fast. You have no idea. I mean, I looked at one of my sons and I'm like, you're obviously potty trained. You're married. I do not remember. And it's like a blessed blur. And he's like, oh, yeah, Addison potty trained me. I was like, oh, okay, great. That was good. You had older brothers. But it goes by fast. And when I was looking at this whole idea of the fight for female, I realized that the enemy is after the family. So I was speaking at a church in San Antonio, and the matriarch of the church came up to me, and she said, Lisa, have you ever heard of Derek Prince? And I said, I've heard of him. I've never met him. And she said, we hosted him. And afterwards, we drove back to the hotel, and we turned around. He was weeping in the back seat. And we said, Brother Prince, what's the matter? He said, I see an attack coming against the women. And if the enemy can get the women, he will get the children. And I am watching how women are in agreement with the transitioning of their children. They have empathy towards this. It's like the enemy is like, I've emasculated the men. And now I'm going to confuse the women. And he's gotten the women who should be protecting the children and the men who should be protecting the women and the children somehow to just partner with an unmaking of the image of God and the sanctity of life. And these are two things the church cannot be quiet about. We can argue about all sorts of other things, but when it comes to the sacredness of the unborn life and even elderly, and also we need to understand that male and female capture the image of God. And when you attack the image of God, because think about it, he's attacking an entire generation's formation, hoping that they will never trust God with their transformation.
Yeah, that's good. In your book, you connect the rise of feminism around the same rise as the Jesus movement, the Great Awakening.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, so that's really interesting. But what do you think it was that not some people latched onto feminism and not to the Jesus movement? Or do you feel like there was a blurring of
I
the two?
think it was a choice.
It was a choice.
I think everybody was like, I'm hungry for something more.
Yeah.
And then Betty Friedan was like, don't you wish there was something more? And they were like, yes, that's what I think. But there was a very strategic plan to isolate the women in the home. Well, they weren't really isolated, but they were in the home. And then the man went out, and then they said, okay, we're going to corrupt the man because he'll leave the house. And then we'll tell the women, oh, you need to be liberated from the house. And so now the women, they're saying, there's got to be something more. Aren't you tired of just loving your husband, serving your husband and your children? Oh, I am tired of that. Why? It's like the enemy. He always will take something. And there was a spiritual longing, but he implanted this anger towards the men, anger towards society, anger for their position. We're not going to be subservient. I was alive during all of this. I was born in 1960. So I watched my mom put up like a letter on the refrigerator and tell my dad he had like 30 days or she would divorce him.
For 30 days for what?
Just change his behavior. She had a list. And I just felt like saying, Mom, he's gonna go. Because my dad was 100% Sicilian. There was no way she was going to tell him what to do. And he wasn't really even doing, he was an amazing provider. And yet she didn't like this or she didn't like that. And so when we have a hunger, the enemy will always get us to settle for the less rather than the more. And the less is always easier to find. It's everywhere.
Yeah.
You know, everybody knows they were created for more, but it's not more stuff. And it's not more attention or more accolades of man. It is more of the presence of God. And when I say, you know, the transformation, I'm not just talking about an experience. I'm talking about to know as you are known.
Yeah. Was there a broader, was there some benefit to feminism? Because I remember there being women that like couldn't go buy a car without their husbands. And
Yes.
I've heard those stories.
Yeah.
And then there seems to have been a overcorrection of sorts.
Yes.
Right? Because if a woman doesn't have kids and doesn't have a family and she wants to go work in the marketplace,
Yeah, that
like,
just seems silly.
what business is it of mine to be like, no, you could only be a wife? Like, that's silly.
Yeah,
So it seems like there was an
100%.
overcorrection, but then that overcorrection has now multi-generationally, third generation, fourth generation feminism has really impacted women's identity.
So the very first author of feminism is Mary Wollstonecraft.
Okay.
And she is the mother of Mary Shelley, who wrote Frankenstein. So it was always a little tainted. And the thought pattern was basically women are oppressed because marriage is wrong. Women are oppressed because God is wrong. Marriage is, women are oppressed because we should never be in a marriage. And Percy Shelley was very...
You're saying this is first generation feminism?
This is, yes.
The roots of feminism was that.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
Okay.
It was very tied to the French Revolution. She had been part of that, lied about being married to an American, escaped back to the UK where she was from. So all this kind of, now there did need to be equal pay for equal work, but that was taken care of in 1964. So 1978 is when you started having more and more of the angry feminism. And ERA, Phyllis Schlafly, who was a Harvard educated attorney, she said, hey, this is going to open the door to all sorts of mess. So it's kind of saying, oh, we're all equal. Well, we're all equal, but we're different. And so when you say that they're all the same, so it was about the deconstruction of the family. And even like Susan B. Anthony and stuff, I haven't gone to see it, but it's my understanding in the US when it came, it involved a spirit table, they had clairvoyance, they had channeling, all this kind of stuff. So again, think about the enemy. He's always going to separate the man from the woman. We can go all the way back to the last thing that Moses did before they went into the promised land. There were 5 daughters that were very much in a situation like you just brought up, who they said, hey, our father did not perish in the rebellion. He died of natural causes, but he had no sons. And now we have no inheritance. We're not married. And Moses brought it to God. And he said, what do I do? And he said, in the promised land, the daughters get the same inheritance as the sons. But somehow during religion and somehow through culture, we have bought into the oppression again. So God has never been about oppressing women. He's always been like, hey, you know, I believe they're co-heirs of the joint of life. But we've got this whole mess going on because we get involved. Religion has a tendency to be oppressive. So we've got culture sexualizing, religion silencing, and now we've got a mess. So yes, women have been oppressed by men, you know, but that's been a while.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even in the biggest impact from a historical standpoint of what the message of Jesus did was it reframed monogamous marriage because that wasn't common in the Roman culture. It gave women dignity and in the ability to be, you know, the first woman who saw the tomb, the empty tomb was those women, right? And then the protection for babies, like the Romans were throwing the babies into the rivers, and it was the Christians that were rescuing the babies. And so it's like a radical shift that you don't really see the same aspects in parts of the world where there isn't some sort of Jesus Christian influence. So
Judeo-Christianity has always been the best for women. I mean, other people could argue other stuff, but it historically has always been the healthiest and the best. But yet, I mean, going back to your point, yes, women have been oppressed in the past, but does that mean we oppress back?
Yeah, that's good.
I mean,
that's
like,
good.
Are we going to believe that God made us? And this is my whole idea. Are we going to answer back how we've been treated, or are we going to remember our divine entrustment, that we are the multipliers, that we are the ones that take something that's not good and make it so very, very good? There's a really bizarre scripture that I looked in every commentary. Nobody could figure out what it meant. It was, I believe it's Jeremiah 25:14. Didn't write about it in this book, but it said, God will do a new thing. a woman will encircle a man. And another version of it says a woman will encircle a warrior or encompass a warrior. And they said it seems like it's kind of this prophetic thing, but I'm watching what's happening with men. And I feel like women need to come alongside the men and say, pornography addiction is not the end of your story. You are a warrior.
Come on.
You are a man. I'm going to speak to that prince that is in you. I'm not going to speak to who you've been. I'm going to speak to the destiny of who you are becoming. Having raised 4 sons, I line them up every single night, and I would say, you are for signs and wonders. You are not for death and destruction. You will see up close what your father and I only saw in the distance. You will lay hold of with your hands the things we touched in prayer. You're going to speak out loud and with great courage the things we only dared to whisper. And I told him, I said, you are disciples taught of the Lord, and great is your peace and undisturbed composure. And people are like, where is that? Isaiah. Like, you pray the word over your children. Yeah, and the word watches over them to perform it. It facets their life so that they can be a sign and a wonder. And I told him, you are for signs and wonders. You're not for death and destruction. And Mike, I put that in my children because you know what? No one did that for me.
That's good. That's really powerful. Around the same time, we see the rise of the sexual revolution, which was framed
70s,
as a means to liberate women. And I think it's fair to say, like, it's led to more destruction. We've seen the divorce rates and the breakdown of the family just completely increase. So what do you see some of these shifts and the effects of it today in terms of women in and out of the church?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there are so many young girls in the church, beautiful, young, gifted girls, cannot find a husband I mean, if you started a dating service, where you could pair these amazing girls with guys, they cannot find the guys. The guys are lost. They cannot find their way out of the black hole of just discouragement and despair. And so it's having a breakdown there. And then but they're saying men are having more virtual sex and less actual sex. And they don't know how to have intimate connections with anyone. And then girls are doing a lot of the same things. Girls that are 15 to 24, I think right now, they say that are sexually active, 50% of them have some type of STI. You know, it's not STD anymore. It's called STI.
You said 50%? Half? Oh my gosh.
The active ones. We never even talk about the HIV is still a thing. The AIDS is still a thing. That chlamydia is, all of those things. None of that stopped. We just kind of keep downplaying it, change it from a disease to an infection, make it sound. But there is obviously a very targeted scheme of the enemy to stop generations, to stop the birth, to stop children going forward. Because what is it? What you've got a son and you've got a daughter. It says like arrows in the hands of a warrior.
Yeah.
Are their children born in their youth? So what if the enemy knows that our children live beyond us? He doesn't get to live beyond. He's angelic, but he does not reproduce. He does not have life and legacy, and he hates women because women partner with God to carry life. And when God set up something, and this is something I feel like the church hasn't navigated well, because I see it every time I go out. I say, when God set enmity between the woman and the serpent, whose side did he put the woman on? And everybody just looks at me, and I'm like, there's 2 sides, good and evil. That's it. God's good, serpent's evil. Whose side? And I'll say, he put the woman on his side. He said, your seed is going to crush his head. Now he was prophesying. And now we see in the book of Revelation, we see a dragon and the woman, which is corporately Israel, specifically Mary, and now corporately the church, specifically the bride. We see this interaction, and we see that he is enraged. It said, now the dragon was enraged with the woman and went to make war against her children. And then what does it say? Those that keep the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Jesus. So we know that's not isolated to Israel because it says testimony of Jesus.
Yeah, that's good. In a moment, I want you to speak to both the men and the women, and to give them some wisdom, and just some practical nuggets and takeaways in terms of your grandmother now married 40 years. I think a lot of people 40 years plus are like, man, I would love that, but you don't know my situation. So I want you to do that. But you have this theme of counting the cost, right? And I think ultimately that's what it comes down to, is like, are we willing to count the cost of what's going to happen in the future? And are we willing to consider who we are tomorrow may not be who we are today as men and women, that the things you think you desire may not be the things you actually desire when you cross over whatever threshold, motherhood, family, different career paths. And so it seems like that really is something that a message that I'm trying to give young men. Hey, count the cost and consider what the future version of you and how you can bless them now by making better decisions as the current version of you.
Right.
And you have some of this kind of theme of like counting the cost in the book.
Yeah. Well, my youngest son, I remember he'd gone to Bible college and done some stuff, and he looked at me and he said, "Mom, I feel like to finish he said, I feel like I've worked so hard on myself and read the word and stuff." He said, "But I know I need to have someone in my life that holds my feet to the fire." And he said, "I'm not going to really ever grow up all the way until I'm married." And so John and I are very big believers that marriage is catalytic for growth.
Come on.
And that marriage is two people committed to bringing out the best in one another, not trying to best one another, not trying to win arguments. And so to that end, everything shifted when John and I realized that we were speaking to one another as though we were enemies rather than allies. And enemies are experts in the other person's weaknesses. And for some reason, as soon as I got married to John, I could outline all of his weaknesses. I'm like, had a whole list. But when I began to look at him different, God was like, you talk to him like you are fighting him. Your problems are on the other side of the table and you're on the same side of the table. Speak to him like an ally. Begin to highlight his strengths. Come on. Speak strength to his strengths. And so I thought, my husband is a man of integrity. And so I began to celebrate his strengths. And I thought everybody's celebrating him on the road. When he comes home, I need to humble him. Like when he comes home, he needs to come down. You know, Mr. Man of God is out there, Mr. Book's out there. But the truth is, John didn't care about what everybody else said about him. He only cared what I said about him. And I withheld celebration and admiration from him, thinking that would be helpful. And the truth is it put him at risk. And so I started to flip how I spoke to my husband. Now, John has always spoke strength to my strengths, but I had never seen that modeled. And so in my own, like my parents never even kissed that I ever remember seeing them cuddle, kiss, or anything like that. So I had to model that with my husband, and my boys watched it. And so it made my sons aware of what kind of wife they wanted. Somebody that would, no, that's not right, stand, but be respectful and actually say, you're better than that. That is not who you are. But also celebrate their strengths. So in front of them, I used to say things like, look at your dad. He just gets cuter every single year. And because John loves it when I talk about him. But if you don't talk about your husband, he'll talk about himself. And that was part of the problem with me. I was like, I'm not going to talk about him. He's talking about himself enough. But it was because I wasn't.
Yeah, that's good. I was having a conversation with an acquaintance of mine, and we were talking about this whole like being a provider and this whole thing. And I really drove home the point is like, I don't think most women understand, most wives don't understand how powerful their encouragement is. And not just their encouragement, but their belief in their husband to go further and to do more than they think they're capable of. I think sometimes men need that that like belief of like, you can do it. Like if our values are for this and this, you can do it. You can figure it out. We can figure it out. And I believe in you. And so I've told the story a couple of times, but when I was working at the church I was at after we were debt free, 2013 to 2015. 2015, I was coming back from South by Southwest, and I could kind of sense that the church was like, they were kind of over be traveling and doing stuff. They were like, okay.
They're like,
this is enough.
Okay.
You're gone all the time.
You need to do your own thing now.
Yeah, and I remember my wife, who was home with Levi at the time, I remember calling her and saying, hey, it's getting tense. I could sense it. And do you think we can pray about me quitting and transitioning into doing this stuff full time? And I remember it was so vivid. She said, there's nothing to pray about. You need to come home and put in your 2-week notice. And I was
that just was like a shot of courage.
Yeah. And and my wife's not like the rah encourager per se. She's very introverted. But that to me was like, oh my gosh, you have more courage than I do at this time.
Yeah.
And you're home with a 6-month-old.
Right.
And we don't have another income. And this is it.
That's almost exactly our story.
Yeah.
Literally. I mean, I watched my husband go from a boy to a man when I stopped being his mother and I started being his wife. And a wife actually will speak destiny over her husband.
Yeah, that's good.
Even because I had gotten so diminishing, like, oh, you need to listen to me. I had to step back for a while and say, I believe you'll make the right decision. And in my head, I was like, no, he's not. No, he's not. But he did. And you have to build a confidence. And he does the same thing with me. Like I have watched my husband say, Lisa, you can do this. And I'll think, I can't do it. And he's like, yeah, you can. Yes, you can. You can do this. And we are supposed to be each other's advocates. Advocates means you fight for, but it also means that you're going to be toe to toe asking the person the questions they don't want to answer and telling them the things they don't want to hear. Yeah. You're a transformational, not a transactional relationship in a marriage. And so you're committed to that. And too many wives are, I'll just say one thing. I wish I would have taken more risk. I wish I would have let my husband make more mistakes. Because John would kind of come to me, and when I was like, oh, he'd go, okay. But if I said, you know what? Yeah. And he'd do it and it'd be a success. And there were so many times where John felt something like, John, this is him. It's coming to my heart to give away 250,000 books. I was like, wait, no, we're in a downturn economy. We are not giving away 250,000 books. And he's like, yep, we're going to give away 250. And I was like, how about we start with 100? How about we start with 100? Because that's what I thought we could do. Yeah. And John made a fist, slammed it on the table and said, my faith is attached to 250,000 books. Oof. And you know what? We gave away 270,000 that year. Wow. And to date, we've given away 66 million resources. Wow. What if I'd shut him down? What if I'd shut him down? What if I'd said, no, that's stupid, don't do it? What if I'd shamed him? But you know what? When he was that bold with it, we all joined hands and we prayed a prayer that scared what was scared inside of us. And that means if you're not praying the kind of prayers that require faith, then you're just praying wimpy prayers. You're praying maintenance prayers, keep my kids safe prayers. That's why I prayed that my children's world would enlarge, not shrink.
That's good.
Yeah. And so I think moms and dads, I have them say this to me all the time. You're not raising kids right now. It's really bad. Yeah. Well, you know what? I said the same thing to my mom. And the truth is, you're handpicked for this moment in time.
That's good.
To be their parent, and they're handpicked for this moment in time to be your child. And you don't want to be like the children of Israel and say, oh, we're afraid for our wives and children. This is a season. This is not a generation of victims. This is a generation of threats. And that is why the enemy is working so overtime to distract them from who they are, tell them to keep looking back at their past, looking at their trauma, attacking their parents. I don't even know if this generation understands what trauma is. And I don't mean that mean, but so many people that have gone through war, they are not feeling as sorry for themselves as people that right now are like, well, I got unfollowed and so doesn't like my post and they're not doing, this is like, no, that's not a real world. Yeah. That's a virtual world. And so as parents, be consistent. Yeah. Be consistent. Your children will not follow what they say. What you say, they'll follow what you model. Yeah. Yeah. And so that's very important.
That's good. Yeah. More is caught than taught in a lot of these conversations. What words would you have, just words of wisdom as we close out? We're going to go over to our Patreon section in a second, have a conversation. It's a little too dicey for YouTube. I want to see what she thinks about the trans issue. We're going to talk about how there's a huge divide between men and women, young men and women politically. But just as we close out this segment, what words of encouragement would you have specifically? My audience here is probably like 20 to 35 predominantly. Yeah. What advice and just practical steps that you have for the women, and then what advice, practical steps that you have for the men?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I do believe that there was a second epidemic during the pandemic. I believe there was a release of cowardice. And so I want to tell you, you have every right to be courageous.
Come on.
And you have every right to pursue a woman. I hear so many stories of young men afraid of being rejected. Listen, if she does not value you, then that's okay, walk away. But some women want to be pursued. And so I give you permission as a grandmother, as a Sicilian woman, I'm just going to tell you, you have every right to recover your healthy masculinity. I'm sorry. You've heard words like toxic masculinity. Masculinity in and of itself is not toxic. Masculinity is God-given. So I'm going to ask you to get into the presence of God and ask God to reawaken who you really are and not cave under the culture. So I'm speaking to the young men. You are to be strong. That is what the Bible says. Not foolish, not fearful, but to be strong and of good courage, because the Lord your God is with you. And I believe there's a generation of princes and exiles. And so I'm calling you forth like a Mama Deborah. I'm calling you forth and saying, God has spoken to you. And you're thinking, I'm not sure what he has spoken. Then get in the word and hit your knees and put down your phone and listen and then pursue. You will never regret taking steps forward, but you are never going to see the faithfulness of God when you are just sitting around waiting. Take action. Go ahead and move forward. God is a really big target, and the only way you're going to miss him is if you don't move. So I give you permission to move. I give you permission to be masculine. I give you permission to be kind and strong. I give you permission to not have to act like the women tell you have to act, but act how you are wired to act.
Jeez. And what words would you have for the women?
For the women, hey, listen. I'm going to talk to the moms right now that are feeling so conflicted that you say, I felt you, Lisa, but I feel so much pressure. I hear things like, oh, you're just a mom or you're just a stay-home. Listen, being a mother is the most difficult and the most rewarding position I've ever held. And it is the one that I honor the most. There is no greater honor for me than to be a mother and to be now a grandmother. You will never regret the time you invest in your children, but you may regret the time you invest at the office, the time you spend on social media, the clothing that you buy. Do not allow culture to frame your life, to even put you in a category of being a trad wife where you feel like you don't have any kind of freedom there, or boss babe, and you have to go out and make things happen. You can merge those things and you could be organic in your life. You don't have to do it all at once, but you can dream in one season and build in the next. And that is healthy, and that is what will make you be strong. So be strong, women. We need you to have strength. One of my favorite quotes of all times is by Matthew Arnold. If ever there comes a time when the women of the world come together purely and simply for the benefit of mankind, they will be a force such as the world has never known. God does not bless what does not benefit all. I believe that the answer of woman is desperately needed right now, and I believe you're alive to be that answer.
We're going to go to the Patreon-only extended version of this conversation. It's a little too much for YouTube. So consider signing up for a free 7-day trial where you could see the entire conversation and get access to all of our future podcasts, be able to interact with our guests, and much more. Here's a little preview of what's available on Patreon. I'll see you over there.
Taylor Swift saying, Ariana Grande, they're blatant. They're blatantly saying, yes, we practice witchcraft. What is the problem with that? I mean, when you say to a woman that your child is an obstacle, at the end of the day, yes, I don't like that we're trying to separate the Christians from politics, because he said, you have to make a decision. Are you going to vote against an opposer to the things of godliness or a transgressor of the things of godliness? I could never put my vote or my voice alongside something that, and the first thing I said, I read it and I said to my friend, oh my gosh, a reform leader must have fallen.